Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another episode of Factions Compared. The idea for today's video was suggested by Mraz Helmer, and we'll be comparing Sci-Fi cannon fodder, specifically the Grunts from Halo, the B-1 battle droids and the Stormtroopers of Star Wars, and the Zergling from Starcraft. The rules are pretty simple. We'll be looking at only the standard cannon fodder units. So for example, the B-1 battle droid, not the entire CIS army. But because we're talking about cannon fodder, we'll consider not only the strength of a single unit, but how the units work together. And that's everything from how effective the group is to how cheap and easy to produce they are. Before we get into today's last time at the end of the video, I asked you guys to choose which was worse, the TIE Fighter or the Cylon Raider. You guys overwhelmingly chose the TIE Fighter, so that will be added to the official record. Anyway, back on topic, today again we're comparing Grunts, B-1 battle droids, Zerglings, and Stormtroopers. And yeah, that means no 40k today because I need a break from you guys. Just kidding, not really. Let's start with Grunts, and as with all entries on today's video, Grunts were relatively cheap, expendable foot soldiers for a massive, diverse military, specifically the Covenant Army. Grunts were the lowest ranking caste within Covenant society, and were populated by billions and billions of Ungoi. By Earth stand, Ungoi are a somewhat strange species. They are stocky, possessing both an exoskeleton, like an arthropod, and a spinal-based nervous system, like non-arthropods. And uniquely, the exoskeleton seems largely a defensive feature, which, alongside their sharp teeth, significant mass, and powerful arms, allows them to kill during hand-to-hand combat. However, somewhat holding them back in this respect was a weak lower body, comparatively slow speed to humans, especially when standing upright, and shorter stature. And Ungoi's powerful forearms are meant for movement and climbing, so in cases where they're fighting, Grunts are fairly top-heavy. They also require methane masks and tanks, making them unwieldy in many environments. Despite their portrayal, Grunts are not inherently unintelligent, and before their abduction into the Covenant, they actually had a fully industrialized planet. But to say that their intelligence has not been cultivated within the Covenant is an understatement. In battle, Grunts are deployed en masse and almost always under the command of elites or brutes. They're nonetheless more than capable of following orders and executing strategy. The main thing the Prophets, and thus the Covenant, saw within their species, however, was their rapid reproduction and maturation. Grunts lay eggs, often, and newborn Grunts are ready for combat in less than a decade. That makes them pretty obvious cannon fodder candidates. However, I honestly think they're poorly situated for the role they're thrown into, notwithstanding their quick reproduction. From a basic level, Grunts aren't designed to walk upright, and certainly not while holding a weapon. As I said, they're not inherently unintelligent and actually have several physiological and social advantages, mainly their ability to climb, their impressive sense of smell, and their pack mentality. This racial bias within the Covenant has held their abilities back significantly, and I can imagine a scenario where Grunts are very effective scouts, perhaps operating as snipers or heavy jackals if unique weapons were made for them. What's more, because of their domination within the Covenant caste system, the species has actually regressed, leading to resentment, fear, and rebellion within the Grunt ranks. And this can be contrasted with the elites, who are completely subservient and loyal to the Prophets because they're treated more like partners. Nonetheless, some Grunts who survive and gain expertise actually earn leadership positions, leading their brothers into battle. But let's move on to the first of our two Star Wars factions, the CIS and their B-1 battle droids. Battle droids were the expendable heart of the Separatist army, and were killed in absolutely extraordinary numbers during the Clone Wars, with many clones individually killing hundreds of battle droids. B-1s were deployed more extensively than even Grunts, and as such were made as cheaply as possible. They were basically a skeleton with little physical presence and operating mostly as a platform for carrying a blaster rifle. On the positive side, they're very deployable, both small and almost always available in large numbers, and easy to produce. However, there's really no ignoring just how poorly physically designed they are for combat. However, even with those issues, the droids could have been saved with good programming. Unfortunately, that isn't present. B-1s have very poor reaction times, little concept of strategy other than swarming enemies, and often, despite understanding and showing fear, have little concept of self-preservation. After the Battle of Naboo, which saw the end of centralized battle droid controllers, the effectiveness of the B-1 actually decreased. Although the single vulnerability was no longer present, many droids saw degraded mental states, behavioral issues, and also physical and maintenance issues. Much of this can be tied to the fact that B-1s were over-relied upon, thrown into a variety of roles, and meant to perform specialized functions, despite not having the programming to do such a thing. Again, these droids are meant to be disposable cannon fodder, and you see them operating the guns on capital ships. And this is the key. During the war, B-1s were used across the galaxy, and killed endlessly and easily by much more effective clone troopers. The main issue is this paradoxical design. If the B-1 was meant to perform a variety of roles, the CIS should have invested more in each model, perhaps doubling the cost of production, with much more focus on programming and processing power, while thus cutting the droid population in half. Otherwise, if you want a cheap, easily deployed droid army, create something else to man your ships, lead your squads, and do whatever else. Make your disposable army just that, basically a line of droids, which is nothing more than a gun on a stick, because that's basically how effective the B-1 is now without that being fully embraced. The other issue is that advancements in droid design were often pushed to newer droid models, notwithstanding the fact that the B-1 was the mainline soldier for the CIS throughout the war. So you have the bread and butter of your army not getting regular upgrades. But let's move on now, several decades later, to the Galactic Empire and their stormtroopers. Now, in reality, there were several types of troops that were less advanced than stormtroopers, but these guys were seen as the faceless horde of the Empire, and were deployed across the galaxy in numbers. Also contributing to their cannon fodder status is their out-of-universe perceived inefficiency and their supposed absolute loyalty to the Empire. Obviously, the Stormtrooper Corps was birthed from the Republic's clone army. However, as the original clones aged, Stormtroopers were made up of enlisted humans, some original clones, and clones from other sources. By the time of the Galactic Civil War, the effectiveness of the army had decreased, as the army's makeup was watered down. However, despite this, the Empire stormtroopers were almost always victorious in battle, with of course some exceptions, and they cemented the Empire's reign in both military and policing roles. Part of the reason stormtroopers were so effective is due to the heavy degree of militarization and singular control the Empire exerted over the galaxy. Near limitless funds were dumped into the stormtrooper program, with extensive cloning and recruitment programs, all supplemented by what was considered generally to be superb training. On top of that, you arm stormtroopers with the serviceable E11 and protective plastoid armor. So you have the rare case where your expendable troops are actually selectively recruited, trained well, and well armed. And the Empire did this because they didn't face the same resource scarcity, or in this area at least, poor direction of either the CIS or the Covenant. And the near limitless funds poured in by the Empire is an inherent benefit to the program. There is little evidence of stormtrooper shortage throughout the galaxy, though perhaps in the case of a full-scale war rather than a rebellion, the Empire may have seen some shortages. But we do have one main drawback, and to be honest, that's on-screen feats. Much of what we see in A New Hope can be ignored, as Vader ordered the escape of the Falcon from the Death Star, and the Empire has the good guys barely able to escape Cloud City. However, the Empire's loss at Endor on the ground cannot be ignored. We have some of the Empire's best troops on the ground, supported by light armor. They are, in the end, defeated by Ewoks and a rebel strike team. However you describe that loss, whether it's underestimating Ewoks or something else, their failure resulted in the fracturing of the Empire, and that can be placed largely on the backs of defeated stormtroopers. So far, we've had alien foot soldiers, a largely recruited army, and droids. This last faction is far different. The Zerg are a faction made up of several races, which have been assimilated into the Zerg swarm. Generally, upon assimilation, the DNA of a race is added to the swarm, which helped the Zerg as a whole evolve and create new evolutionary templates, while the species itself is heavily mutated and put into the Zerg service towards their ultimate goal of genetic perfection. This means that the Zerg as a whole battle are constantly evolving and improving. Zerg communicate psionically through a group consciousness, with lower level warriors completely subservient to the Zerg upper command hierarchy. For that reason, though intelligence manifests quite clearly at a species level, on an individual level, many Zerg, including the creatures we discussed today, are basically animalistic. One species assimilated by the Horg was the Zagash Dune Runner, which formed the basis for the Zergling mutation strain. The Zerg rely on overwhelming numbers during battle, and the Zergling facilitate that. Many Zerg share common features: extreme vitality, regenerative properties, the use of blade-like appendages, the use and reliance on underground tunnels, and the ability to multiply. Zergling possess all of this and more. They are extremely fast, have incredible reflexes and sensory organs, and even on an individual level, are deadly. As alluded to, Zerglings form the basis of the swarm, and thus can reproduce very quickly, with a single surviving Zerg essentially able to replicate and serve as the basis for a new swarm. This is made more potent by Zerglings' extraordinarily regenerative abilities, which allow it to recover from otherwise mortal injuries. As such, especially on a large scale, an individual Zerg is extraordinarily expendable. The swarm kills by overwhelming an enemy and literally ripping them to shreds. And although Zerglings are only the size of a large dog, together they're powerful enough to destroy tanks or other armor. The Zergling strain is of course constantly improving, and there are many different sub-variants, so when ranking today's video, I'm just going to speak generally. With that out of the way, let's rank the cannon fodder from worst to best. At number 4 and 3, I think we have two factions which have poorly used the resources available to them. At number 4 is the Droid army. I think I've explained well the paradoxical design of the B1, and their inefficiency is almost self-evident. Grunts are a little bit better. Although they're, quite unhappily I might add, thrown into a role they're not well suited for, they're still fairly potent enemies. In my opinion, they're not quite as potent as number 2, the Imperial Stormtrooper Corps, which is powered by the near limitless money the Empire poured in to their military programs. Stormtroopers are not as easily replaceable as B1 battle droids, though heavy cloning and recruitment programs keep their numbers high. Stormtroopers receive good training, good equipment, and had they not been so incompetent at the Battle of Endor, may have seen the number 1 spot, as there are few other defeats where they've shown any weakness. However, we can't ignore Endor, and there's also the fact that the number 1 spot is filled by exceptional warriors, the Zerglings. The Zerg as a whole are a very interesting species, relying solely on their biology, unlike say the Yuzan Vong or the Flood, which incorporate either organic technology or stolen non-organic tech. Perhaps the Zergling hasn't quite reached perfection, but they're nearly there. They're basically, in my mind, the perfect cannon fodder warriors. Although expendable, they're very easily replaced, while also not falling into the trap of thus having the individual warrior be ineffective. They are animalistic, but their tactics are such that that's okay. And there's really not a whole lot else I'd change about the Zergling, especially when they work with other Zerg strains. That is, however, just my opinion. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Take a second and vote in the upper right-hand corner. Alright, so on to the question of the day, and I actually had a bit time finding questions when I went to go record this video just because I get so many. I'm still going to just look before I record, but if you want to bring the questions to my attention, use the hashtag AskEck, ASKECK. That way I can look through my community tab and find questions relatively quickly. You can also feel free to ask me on Twitter, and I can see them like that too. Today's question of the day comes from Dana, who wants to know more about the New Republic fleet and my general strategy for managing it. So in my mind, the New Republic fleet is kind of a good compromise between the lack of a real navy of the Old Republic and the Galactic Republic before the Clone Wars, and the over-militarization of the Empire. The basic idea was that you have 4 fleets which can respond to crises, although are really meant to be a reserve, and in most cases a planet should have its own standing fleet to stop pirate raids or whatever else. Well, the 4 main fleets and the 5th roving fleet are really only brought in the case that something too serious happens or there's an actual large-scale attack. This makes sense to me. Whether I have 4 fleets or 16, I don't know. It depends on scale and hyperspace travel time. I think the fleet should be able to respond to any crisis in, about half a day. And it is true, even within those 4 main fleets, there were often sub-fleets or battle groups. For example, Coruscant always had had standing forces, or almost always. So I think that makes sense. And regarding the introduction of new ships, I think they also did that correctly. They added new class ships where there was the most danger, and then, resources were moved between the other fleets as needed. The main issue I have is that the new class ships weren't implemented heavily enough. I would have made basically as many starfighters, including K-Wings and E-Wings, and as many self-sufficient carriers like the Nebula as I possibly could. Instead, the New Republic focused too many on further iterating ship design when I don't think that was really necessary. But thanks for the great question. Thanks for listening to me ramble, guys. And again, you can ask your own questions, which I'll address at the end of the video with #AskEck. Anyway, until next time, guys, this has been Eck. May the Force be with you.